Yes, the recent Al Jazeera stitch-up job in One Nation raises some serious issues. Do you think it is ethical for the ABC to be recording private conversations of politicians without their knowledge? And if so, would you like the ABC to do it to you?
I'll start with John Roscombe, who's a noted critic of the ABC.
Sometimes, yes, Tony.
Would you like to see us privatised?
Yes. No, look, I think this is an issue of public interest. If you have politicians or politicians' assistants seeking the support of the public, seeking to influence public policy, then I must admit, as difficult as some of the ethical issues were raised, I don't think it is inappropriate. What concerned me is a former Queensland minister talking about his role in regulating things, his role in determining the lives of the rest of us. So for me, there's the question of guns and that process, but it's also the attitude of those two people to regulation and to how they were to govern the country and gain seats. So, look, I think it was in the public interest, although I think there are questions around it.
OK, well, actually, let's hear from Arthur. Do you agree in the public interest and therefore justified?
I wasn't particularly fussed that there'd been an inverted commas a sting, because you sort of get used to these things. I mean, there have been all these exposés in the UK, for example. I remember Prince Andrew got caught up in at least one sting. So I've come to accept that this is a bit of a journalistic technique, that this happens. Now, people say, oh, but hang on, it's entrapment, and they wouldn't have done this if they hadn't been enticed. But the fact of the matter is that, faced with a choice, they made certain choices. And what we are talking about here is the choices that were made. And those choices were to be prepared to entertain getting money from foreign sources to influence Australian elections and to seek to dilute Australia's gun laws. And no matter what Pauline Hanson may say now in retrospect, the fact of the matter is she has clearly raised questions about what happened at Port Arthur. She has clearly raised questions through her people, Dixon and Ashby, about getting money from outside sources. So, in a sense, it was a revelation of a state of mind and what it might lead to. And certainly it was a turning point for the Prime Minister, I think, because you know, all of a sudden, John Howard's gun laws were up for auction. And there's no way...
Let me ask you this, if it genuinely was a turning point for the Prime Minister, do you expect him now to put One Nation last on every ticket?
Well, what he's said he's going to do is put it after Labor.
But not the Greens.
Well, look...
But not the Greens. As if the Greens are an equivalent to this kind of behaviour of One Nation.
Well,
I'm interested in that.
Well, no, we attack all sorts of parties. We attack the Greens, we attack One Nation.
You attack yourself. Sometimes you're attacking yourself.
Pretty often.
We're in a coalition that attacks other groups because we want to get votes off those other groups. So we'll criticise, as appropriate, the policies of the Greens.
So is it appropriate for you to have...
the policies of One Nation?
Arthur, given what you've said about One Nation, is it appropriate to have any kind of sharing arrangement with them when it comes to preferences? Because the scary thing is, for many people, that many One Nation people who think like that could actually take advantage of this situation.
Well,
being last on the ticket.
we make a distinction between the One Nation party itself and people who vote for it. Just as we make a distinction between the Greens political party and people who may vote for it.
The people who may get preferences are not the people who vote, they're the people who'd end up in Parliament.
But what we have said, and said clearly, is we will preference Labor before them. And that's where the Prime Minister is now.
So if your preference arrangements lead to any One Nation people, any extra One Nation people getting into Parliament, in the Senate or...
Yeah, but taken to its logical conclusion, you've got a situation where Labor would have to say that they refuse to have any of their members elected on One Nation preferences across the country. And yet, manifestly, that's happened in elections.
I suppose for me, I think, what does it take to make every political party say, we are going to put these people last as a principle? Not only their racism, but their ability to sell out our national interest, our national protection, to the highest bidder offshore. It's just shocking. So to your point, sir, yeah, there are, you know, some ethical issues around what was done, I suppose. But, I mean, to call it entrapment, he didn't kidnap them, put them on a plane and suddenly present them to the NRA. He said, let's go over, and they went over. You know, they were willing. They threw themselves in the hole.
Okay, our questioner's got his hand up. Bob Vinnicombe.
Why do Liberal and Labor take massive donations from the gambling industry, which is the major cause of poverty in Australia?
That's a really, really good point. I think what has happened with One Nation is probably not going to do much to the people who really vote One Nation, but it could do something to all the political parties, in particular Labor and Liberal, to look at our donation regime at the Commonwealth level. It is shocking.
We've actually got a question coming up about that.
I keep preempting
but
your
I just want to
questions.
hear. I'll just go to the other side of the panel, and we'll start with John because his view may be different than Amanda.
Oh, look, it would be different. Notwithstanding my many great differences with One Nation, from my perspective, the Greens pose a challenge to the Australian way of life in a way One Nation doesn't. I think the Greens have a deep strain of anti-Semitism. I think their policies are going to deindustrialise the country. Their policy to ban the export of thermal coal, for example, could put 150,000 people out of work. Their recent policy to say there'll be no new petrol cars from 2030, I think will devastate regional Australia. And you have to remember that it's up to us where we put our preferences. The Labor Party or the Liberal Party can decide. It's up to us. One Nation is no friend of the coalition. It was One Nation preferences that cost the coalition seats in 2016. But from my perspective, I'd put the Greens last.
Okay, Amanda.
Well, firstly, I would point out that the Prime Minister has not been definitive. He has tried to have a bob each way. He said Liberals will preference Labor at One Nation after Labor, but LNP members, National Party members, that's still up to them. So if he was truly a conviction politician on this issue, he would demand every member of the government, every person that could potentially be part of a coalition government, to put One Nation last.
So you're saying that will particularly impact in Queensland, what you're talking about. Are you calling on the Prime Minister to shift that position?
I am calling on the Prime Minister to put One Nation last everywhere.
Probably
in this
won't
country.
listen to you.
Probably won't listen. But it shows that he is not actually... It took him so long to get to this position. It took people calling for weeks for him to get to this position. He didn't do it decisively, and now he's sort of doing it because of public pressure. And in Queensland and other places, there are still many members of the government that are saying, no, we're going to put Labor behind One Nation. So that's the first point. In terms of the Greens, look, there's many policies that I think the Liberal Party are going to destroy the country with. There's many policies I think the Greens will destroy the country with. That is very, very different from having a party that's moved a well-known white supremacist slogan motion in the Parliament of Australia. We need, as a collective group of people, to say, yeah, we might disagree on policies from time to time. In fact, I might think that many of the Greens' policies are delusional, and the LNP, but that's not dangerous. What we're seeing and what we saw in Christchurch is that hate speech can lead to violence. We need to stand up together. We need to reject this, and that's why it's incumbent on the Prime Minister to put One Nation last right around this country.
Lakshmi.
Look, unsurprisingly, I've never voted for the One Nation Party, and I don't know what would propel someone to vote for One Nation. But I think to dismiss that voter and to dismiss their concerns and to not take them seriously is a big mistake. One Nation have built their brand on being, you know, the voice for the battler, the worker, the people that different to the major parties. They're straight-speaking, they're honest, they're true blue, and that is their brand, and that's what's connected with voters. I think the videos that came out, if I was someone who was voting for One Nation and I saw those videos, then I would seriously question what I was being sold and what I was being presented and what I was voting for. Our gun laws are not only a beacon of good governance and leadership domestically, they're an example to the world, and they protect the safety of Australians. It goes to the heart of what a government does. And for One Nation to turn around and to sell the watering down of that policy, if I was voting for One Nation, I'd seriously question what I was voting for, because that is selling off the safety of Australians, and that's not something we should stand for.